talking to you and you're just listening. All of you are experts. We got a taste of that in the questions and answers session. Not just questions were raised, but also you contributed your expertise. And this fact that everybody is an expert on something is reflected in the fishbowl format. It's a way to get all of your insights represented more meaningfully than when I'm just standing here and talking, or Janice or somebody else. So that's the good news. It's exciting, it's interesting, it's new, it's fun. The not so good news is this is the worst possible setting. It's called fishbowl originally because it's circles of chairs. So there's some people sitting in the inner circle and some people sitting in the outer circle. The people in the inner circle do the talking, and the people in the outer circle can move into the inner circle when they want to contribute something. So the entire setting is designed to facilitate people moving from the audience to the speaking role and back to the audience role, and break down the barriers between experts and speakers and the audience listeners and just purely receptive. That won't work so well here because we couldn't arrange seats in a circle, but we're going to try anyway. And the main message here is this only works if you participate. So there's going to be different people sitting there. It's going to be you, somebody from you, not too long, not too short. It's not for the introverted. Les Français comprennent aussi. Ouais? Il y a traduction? Okay. So this will work if some of you accept the invitation to share their expertise. You can ask questions. It's a bit like the Q&A session we had before, but you have a more extended opportunity to address the audience. Be it with questions, be it with your own experience, your own suggestions, your own speculations, or your wishes, what you think should or might come about. You can be speculative. You can discuss as well among each other, like in a Davos-style panel. So it's exciting. So far, I know there's one volunteer to start this off with. That's Teos, right? You haven't regretted your boldness? Please. And usually it's okay for there to be empty chairs. Miguel, you have been through the fishbowl format a couple of times, huh? Yeah, I learned this at the ILO. Okay, so that's the preparation. As I said, it's normal to have empty chairs there because people are encouraged to come up and go down. The first question we would like to discuss in this first round, we're going to have a couple of different rounds. Thank you. Is what characteristics of agriculture index insurance in particular give rise to concerns around client value, sustainability, and scale? It's after all the same topic we're discussing throughout, the balance between client value, between scale, between sustainability. And that's something you have to address in every sort of insurance and probably every sort of product or service you sell. But what's particular about agriculture index insurance in that respect? That's the first question, and the other ones will come later. So there's still a chair if anybody feels encouraged right away to jump up. Thank you. Thank you very much. So since Theos was the first to volunteer, I'd be happy to give him the word first. Does this, you approached me in the break and said you wanted to add something. Is this in line with the first question that I've put up there? Or do you have something to?
I think absolutely, yes. Thank you, Peter. My name is Teus Maurik. I'm an actuary working at the Insurance Regulatory Authority of Uganda. And as an actuary, I'm currently involved in the approval process for a number of index-linked insurance products that have been submitted by the consortium of insurance companies in Uganda that want to enter this market. And as being an employee of the IRA of Uganda, there are basically two key regulatory concerns that I have following the documentation that I've seen from the products that were submitted to the IRA for approval. But however, please note, I'm very much I'm a big supporter of index-linked insurance. I just want to raise this to create awareness of it, and maybe also to discuss how can we prevent, how can we address these issues. So the first thing is about the definition of insurance. Maybe you are aware that index-linked insurance is considered a type of gambling for some people, just because of the phenomenon of basis risk. I can explain that a little bit. The typical requirement for insurance is that the payouts provide indemnity, so to the individual policyholders. So the payout should be linked one-to-one to the size of the damage that he is suffering from the occurrence of the insured event, let's say a drought. Of course, this is just exactly the benefit of index-linked insurance, that for cost reasons, we are not going to check, or the insurers are not going to check the damage, the losses of the individual farmers. I can understand that. We talked about basis risk, of course, and you can define it maybe as the difference, the deviation between the payout that is received from such a policy in case the event occurs, and the actual loss of the farmer. This deviation can be both positive and negative. We generally only focus on the situation that is positive. So the payout is it's negative. The damage is higher. The loss is higher than the payout. So that will result in policyholders being unsatisfied. It may even be very bad for their trust in insurance companies, etc. So that's obvious that this risk, this type of deviations must be minimized as good as possible. This is also, of course, particularly relevant for regulators, because we are supposed to protect the interests of the policyholders. But the deviation, I just want to mention the possibility of a positive deviation. So the payout is higher than the actual loss. I think this may have been the case with the example that Mr. Isaac told about this policyholder who received a huge amount and never bought insurance since. I was wondering, is this guy, this person, this farmer, is he actually still a farmer? Maybe he retired. I mean, is this, what's the risk of this? Because if that would be the case, then basically this policyholder may have found out that this type of insurance is basically a type of gambling. And other people may also other farmers may also start thinking about that. And of course, from an insurer's perspective, this may not be very serious problem as long as the pricing is correct. They pay for it. However, from a regulator, we are not supposed to supervise or regulate gambling or casinos, things like that. So I would like to raise this on how can we prevent that these products can be considered gambling, as gambling. A second issue, which is maybe closely related to this, is the supposed role of aggregators, so-called aggregators. Aggregators are very, the role of aggregators is beneficial for insurers because they act as the policy holder. So all communication can go through the aggregator. The insurance company does not have to communicate with the individual farmers. The aggregator may also collect premiums, but most importantly maybe, he may be responsible for distributing the payout from the insurer in case the event has occurred to the individual farmers that he represents in the area. Now the question for me is, these policy holders are actually not true policy holders. Legally maybe they are, but they're basically only representatives of the true policy holders. I was wondering who is going to regulate the aggregators, because there is, I think, a serious opportunity for fraud in this area. I mean, I'm not accusing those aggregators. But I mean, the way they have to distribute the total payout, of course, from a regulatory perspective, has to be fair. So how is this guaranteed? I know from one of the products that have been submitted for approval that the insurance company actually requires the aggregator to do the best they can to improve the yields of the individual farmers. So they have to inform them. I don't know exactly what they can do, but they have to do the best they can. That's what they are required to do, required by the insurance company. That makes sense. Makes sense. It's similar to saying when you buy fire insurance, you have to be careful that you need to have a fire alarms, etc., just to limit the risk. Still, I mean, these aggregators, when they are supporting the individual farmers in the area, are they doing this in a fair way, fair for each individual farmer in the area? I'm just wondering, who is going to, in general, who is going to regulate the aggregators? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teush. I have a role of a moderator here, so that gives me the privilege to quickly comment on something you said very quickly before I pass the word on to you. So I was at a conference for InsurTech last year, and I met a company who's proposing index earthquake insurance in California. And I asked them, well, how do you go about the insurable interest? First they didn't understand. Then I said, well, but if a supervisor asks if the clients have had any damage, they say, oh, well, that's easy. You just say you had some psychological trauma. That's all we need to hear. So all you have to do is say, yes, I feel some bad after the earthquake, and that's all we need to know to pay the thing. I felt that a very flexible, innovative, unconventional approach to insurable interest. I'm not proposing it here, but at least that's what serious-minded startups who are trying to attract hundreds of millions of investor money are going about doing in a place like the United States. Your comment about the lottery reminded me of my grandmother. The only person in my family who bought lottery tickets regularly, you know, this German lotto thing which has a draw every week, that was my grandmother. And one reason she kept doing it for all of her life is because she always had the same numbers. And she said, if I stop now and these numbers are drawn next week, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to be furious. So that reminds me, perhaps it's not so bad to get this mindset into the heads of the insurance customers. What if a farmer, the farmer that Isaac mentioned, has a terrible loss next year or the year after? Wouldn't he be mad at not having renewed the insurance? Could we transfer this compulsion of my grandmother somehow to insurance customers? You've been buying it for a couple of years now. It's true, you haven't had a payout, but what if next year is a terrible drought? Think of that. Maybe we're going to get back to lotteries later. I think there's a lot to be said about that, or derivatives, or whatever you want to call it. But let me now pass the word on to you. Would you say your name and where you work?
Thank you very much. My name is Munya. I actually work for the Agriculture Insurance Consortium in Uganda. I'm here to share a bit of actual experience, because I think most times we do share sort of theoretical things. Then we've been on the ground with actual experiences of how the farmers are actually reacting to the products that we are putting on the ground, and what we think needs to be done, and what we have done that has worked, and what has not worked. So I think that was one of the reasons that I wanted to share. And one of the main things was to say, I don't think we're at a level of scaling up yet, because we still have a big problem of awareness, sensitization, education. I think people have said it. I've been all over the country. I was in the West just recently, and the people don't know that the products are there. And if they don't know, they will not take up the product. and if they don't know, you can't even explain to them what is going on. So I think where we are, especially in this country and in many other countries that I think I've shared experiences with, is still that. There's still a much more to be done in terms of awareness. And as soon as they are aware and you sensitize them and you tell them what it is, they sign on. It's wrong when people say that the farmers don't want to take insurance. This is from experience. They actually are taking insurance. Like I said, I was in the West. After a presentation, 100 farmers who were there came up and signed up immediately because we're talking in their language. There was someone speaking in their language explaining exactly because they've had drought. The last 8 months they've had drought. There's the armyworm that has just come in, and so they understand that things are happening. So I would like to sort of take away that myth that they don't want to take insurance. They actually want it, but they didn't know that it's actually there, and there's something like that. And I do agree in terms of when we come to basis risks, but I think also there are many steps that have been taken to try and address that basis risk, especially in the product design aspects of the products. We'll be coming to you with our changes that we're trying to do to reduce the basis risk. But I think it's something that also we are well aware of. I think those are the things that I really wanted to share with. Yeah.
Thank you so much. For those who have missed the beginning, I just repeat that you're all invited to come up here in front. Just walk up, I'll get you a free seat, trust me. Oh yeah, there's one comment I wanted to make in response to yours. Yes, and feel free to walk down if you want to, at any point. So in response to your comment, I talked to the insurance supervisor in the Dominican Republic 2 weeks ago. Actually, I did an index insurance supervisory training. And one thing we discussed a bit is the fact that index insurance, as it is targeted to small-scale farmers, is also always microinsurance, pretty much always. So this awareness thing, is this an issue of agriculture insurance, of index insurance, or of microinsurance? I don't know much about Uganda. I haven't been here for ages, but there's some countries like Zambia or the Philippines or Sri Lanka. I just learned that as of now, every September is going to be insurance month in Sri Lanka. I don't think they're going to talk an awful lot about index insurance, but they're going to talk about insurance. So just keeping that in mind and getting index insurance onto the bandwagon of insurance or financial inclusion. More and more countries are doing financial inclusion strategies with support from the World Bank or others. So let's remember to include it there. If we just try to get large-scale campaigns for awareness or education or whatever we want to call it for agriculture index insurance, that's not going to work. But if we can include that into a larger campaign of financial literacy, of insurance awareness, and ideally, let me just finish with my dream, we're going to teach children about insurance, the fundamental things. Why don't you get the premium back? What's the difference between savings and insurance? Why is it the duty of the insurance companies to police fraud? If every 15-year-old Ugandan and Mozambican and Bolivian knows that, I think we're going to be a big step ahead, and that's one thing we're pushing for. But let me stop here and pass the word on to my old colleague, Miguel Solana.
Hello, I'm Miguel Solana from the Impact Insurance Facility of the ILO. And actually, when thinking about value, actually one thing came to my head, which is when I started working on this around 10 years ago, I remember we were in Peru and we were working with farmers. And we were trying to explain farmers a little bit in very simple language, whether they wanted a fair but more expensive product that would be regularly adjusted product, or a cheaper but maybe not so fair product, which would be index insurance. And actually, I think this was quite an interesting conversation because it forced us to try to start thinking about how to define fairness among different insurance products, and how to define what is expensive and what is cheaper, and what is the value that they get out of each of these two products. And this was our exercise. And actually, what we heard from farmers is that they preferred fair but more expensive, because they believe that they don't want to run this, what we call basis risk, but for them it's like, I don't want to bet on something happening to me and not getting anything out of the product, because this is exactly why I'm buying insurance. And this showed us a lot about the perception of the importance in index insurance and getting the value right. Because if you didn't get the value right, you would somehow fail on the promise of insurance. Because pretty much the farmers understood quite well the product, and there was this one thing which was around like, what is it that we're promising to farmers at getting out of it? And actually, when I hear some of the conversations here, I think actually we're overselling the promise of index insurance, and we're selling this as the one option that will sort out all the risk problems that they're facing. And I think we need to be able to measure that. This is the value and our promise, and actually our promise is being only one part of a full set of problems that they have. And actually I found it extremely interesting when we were hearing yesterday that, for example, farmers, despite being insured and having a paid out, they actually stopped producing one season because actually they were paying for school fees and food maybe and other sort of expenses. And we are still believing from our side that our promise is going to be the one that is, and we're selling them the fact that they will be able to be on their feet and everything. So I think we need to start thinking about what is the value, what are we communicating. I agree with the fact that the communication is important. I mean, I started my career, I'm an actuary, but I started my career on a trading floor, and I was dealing with options, meaning financial derivatives. And when I came into the back into the insurance world, and they were explaining me index insurance, it was actually an option. And if I start talking to you about options, put call options with strike prices, and it's executed and stuff, and Black and Scholes models to price the options and so on and so forth, I'm pretty sure we would be out of our talking exactly about the same thing, because a financial a derivative option and an index insurance is exactly the same thing, but we're using extremely different things. I think it's exactly the same thing, and we were already mentioning that. I mean, we need to figure out how to get rid of words like triggers and parameters and things like that, because people are not thinking in those terms. And we need to start simplifying that. And I think this is what I wanted to share, that we need to simplify our language, and talking about options would be extremely confusing for people here, and it's exactly the same thing for farmers out there if we're using the same language that we want to use to define these things in our context.
Thanks a lot, Miguel. Actually, my experience, this question, whether it's insurance or an option, is something that many supervisors worry about. Now, why would that matter at all? Just to remind you that, in my opinion, the number one reason why it matters is that insurance products are supervised by insurance supervisors, and that usually comes with a fair amount of protection of the consumer. A lot of insurance supervision is to make sure that the customers get a fair deal, and the more vulnerable they are and the more risky the offer is, the more we all agree they need to be protected. And that's something totally different if you buy options or hedges or other financial products. That is one thing. On the other hand, earlier this afternoon, I was wondering, what if we start pitching index insurance as insurance at all? Somebody mentioned, I think it was Acre, that their customers didn't want to deal with insurance agents. They didn't trust insurance agents. We've come across people elsewhere who don't trust insurance at all. Well, that's something we try to work on with insurance supervision and consumer protection and regulation and all sorts of education or awareness campaigns, lots of things. But if people have a bad perception of insurance or don't understand insurance, is there something else that they know, Harambe maybe in Kenya, or some other concept which we can use to help them understand index insurance? Do we need to talk about insurance at all? I would like it to be supervised by insurance supervisors, don't get me wrong. I'd like it to be formalized and just as well regulated and supervised as automobile insurance or something else. But when we go out there to the field and try to explain it to the farmer, maybe their local language doesn't even have a word for premium or for insurance or for trigger or for exit or all these sort of things. Can we come up with different language? We'll still have to say insurance in policy terms and conditions, but maybe not in the very first encounter we have with them. But let me stop there. And again, the invitation, I hope that by now there's things that you are interested in, you would like to say or share. I see a first hand there. Remember, you'll have to come up here to share with us, please. Yeah, whoever wants to stay or get down, if you all want, it's okay. If some of you want to stay. Okay. Thanks.
There's one thing I want to add on this. I remember reading in one of the draft policy terms that the policyholder was not supposed to submit complaints about the level of the payout that he has received. He had to sign for this up front. Now we know there's a lack of trust in Africa towards insurers, and one of the ways regulators try to fight that is to establish complaints offices, even within our own regulator here in Uganda, that will allow policyholders to address their complaints, and these will be handed individually. So obviously for this type of insurance that will be simple for regulators, because they are not allowed to receive any complaints. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing, to be honest. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Wale from Africari. I have a little problem with this kind of payouts, because essentially the payouts depends on the weather, and the weather over the years. I mean, the analysis of the weather over the years, as we have to work with climate change over the years, and so historical data may not necessarily agree with present data. Even in Lagos, Nigeria, where I live, the rainy season does not occur at the time it used to occur many years ago. The low atmosphere, which talks about the weather, we have the modeling that actuaries do and all that is essentially based on mathematical modeling, statistical modeling. But the physics of the low atmosphere itself is not well known. And so when you add that with the climate change problem, you'll find that the results that you're going to get at the end of the day may not agree, or most of the time does not agree with reality. So I was thinking, if regulators want to get it right over the years, the gap between the deviation between the actual figures and the one that the trigger gives you, and you monitor it over the few years, and then try and see where you could refine the model so that the trigger point can be very close to the actual. Because there's a problem of climate change taking place. It's there. There's the problem of the physics of the atmosphere not being well understood, and we are putting all the trusts, all the hope on the trigger point that will most likely, especially considering the fact that even in Africa here, data is not very, very current and of very good quality. So it's as if you are not careful, your deviation is going to be always wider than the actual. And when you go like that, some people will gain from it, and some will lose from it, and that is not the essence of insurance. I don't know whether you get the point.
I think you did. Thank you very much. It reminds me of machine learning, of course. So far we've had, as you say, a lot of trouble and spent a lot of money just in establishing the statistical models, how precipitation or wind speed correlates with plant growth or livestock mortality, and how we can detrend that for changing agricultural practices or climate change or other things. So I'm convinced that sooner or later somebody will throw machine learning at that, which is, as I understand it, a technique to get meaning out of large amounts of unstructured data, stuff that we don't even know is worth looking at. I don't know, migratory patterns of birds or cell phone records or God knows what sort of stuff that may give us some indication, and some machine, just by testing every possible combination, may come up with things that will allow us to have this convergence that you mentioned between the index and the real experience faster and more reliable. I think this is a good segue to move to the next level and expand this question to other stakeholders. So how can other stakeholders, we saw this large orchestra in agriculture index insurance, how can they come in and contribute to solve this complex issue of scale, client value, and sustainability? Is that something that's in line with your comments as well? Feel free to stay on the previous level. I don't want to push you, but just to let you and the audience know that that was the next level of question that we intended to discuss.
My comment would be in French. I think that je pense que il y a une synthèse importante qui a été faite au cours des différentes discussions sur ce que c'est que l'inclusion financière. Le premier élément, à mon avis, c'est la confiance, le trust. Le second élément, c'est l'availability. Est-ce que les produits sont disponibles? Un autre élément, c'est affordable. Est-ce que les produits ont un coût raisonnable notamment pour les assurés. Mais je souhaite en fait que ces éléments-là, ces différents éléments, ces 4 éléments qu'on a pu passer en revue, ne soient pas examinés seulement au niveau des assurés. Par exemple, quand on parle de la confiance, the trust, est-ce que les assureurs eux-mêmes se posent la question de savoir est-ce qu'ils ont confiance en fait dans le modèle? Est-ce que par exemple ils pensent que l'index insurance peut être un modèle profitable? Ça c'est une question que je me pose. Donc je souhaiterais que l'analyse qui consiste à dire, OK, sur les 4 éléments, les 4 grands critères, qu'est-ce qui est fait envers les assurés et bénéficiaires de contrats? Donc, on se pose la même question. Sur les 4 éléments, qu'est-ce qui est fait au niveau des assureurs? Éventuellement, sur les 4 éléments, qu'est-ce qui est fait également au niveau des régulateurs, ainsi de suite, donc de toutes les parties prenantes. Si on prend, par exemple, la question de est-ce que le produit est disponible? Mais au niveau de l'assureur, si on examine la question au niveau de l'assureur, est-ce que le produit est disponible? L'élément fondamental, c'est est-ce que les données sont disponibles? Donc, c'est la disponibilité des données, la disponibilité de la technicité pour modéliser en fait le phénomène qui va permettre par la suite de rendre disponible en fait le produit de concevoir le produit et de le rendre disponible en fait pour l'assureur. Et également pour les problématiques d'éducation, nous on a mis en place en fait une réglementation sur l'index insurance en coopération notamment avec la Banque mondiale. Mais ce qu'on constate de façon pratique, c'est qu'il y a un effort d'éducation que nous, en tant que régulateurs, on doit faire à l'endroit des assureurs pour qu'ils comprennent comment ça fonctionne, avant également que l'assureur fasse cet effort d'éducation éventuellement. L'assureur et également le régulateur fassent cet effort d'éducation envers les assurés. Donc, c'est des thématiques qui sont importantes, les quatre grands points dans le cadre de l'inclusion financière, mais il faut avoir en fait un angle d'analyse de ces 4 thématiques au niveau de chacune des parties prenantes pour que globalement en fait on n'ait pas la photo sous un seul angle, mais qu'on ait tous les angles de la problématique pour traiter correctement en fait la problématique.
Merci beaucoup. Okay, thanks. If you allow me to respond in English, I think it's an excellent point, and one thing that I should have emphasized more when I showed the picture of the orchestra. The reason it's so important to talk about the many players in the value chain is that all of them have to understand something. And insurance, understanding insurance is not very easy. Understanding borrowing is easy. Everybody does that informally among brothers and sisters. So there's no human being on the planet older than 10 years, I think, who doesn't understand the concept of borrowing and lending. But there's a lot fewer people who understand insurance in any sort. And then move that to index insurance with all its problematics of basis risk and climate change. It becomes very, very difficult. It's not just the clients who have to understand a bit of it, and the distributors, and the supervisors, and the insurers and reinsurers, and it's also people at the Ministry of Agriculture. If there's any macro level engagement or meso level engagement, it's people at the press who have to understand when somebody complains or when something is launched with a great fanfare. And that's important because behind all that, as you point out, is a reputation risk. So I've come to believe that despite our best efforts with World Bank and donor funds in some countries, we haven't managed to convince insurance companies, for example, in the Dominican Republic, to engage in index insurance because the reputation risk they see is considerable. It takes insurance companies a lot of effort to look good. We know that the reputation of insurance in general is not so very good, not like banking or like telecommunications or Apple. So it takes them a lot of effort to just look good. And to threaten that by one case of basis risk, even if it's just 10 farmers who get a lot of noise in the press, that's a risky, risky choice. Thanks for that. Jonathan.
Thank you, Peter. So these comments I make in the capacity as in my day job as insurance commissioner in South Africa. So so interestingly, South Africa is at the fairly early stages of considering subsidized agricultural insurance scheme. So in that sense, we're certainly not a pioneer or anything like that in insurance. We're probably still catching up, and in particular, government is giving consideration to an index insurance scheme. And but I have to say, there is a lot of interest and excitement about the concept in terms of inclusive insurance, but I think Fangman touched on it, and others before me have, where I think the big policy questions, regulatory questions are around the issue of value to customers, and as Turs touched on, it certainly seems to be something that can't be introduced in a sort of half-hearted or half-baked way. So certainly, if the less granular the index and the information, the more it does become seemingly more like gambling in terms of the discrepancy between the payout and the loss actually suffered. So we would feel more comfortable that it starts to approach insurance the more granular the index becomes, the smaller the gap between the payout and the loss. But obviously that requires going into it with something that is already fairly developed, and I think it's that almost that pass through the start gate problem of how do you go in with a system that is quite sophisticated, because as we know, and this is the case also in South Africa, that we would be dealing with individuals, with farmers who may be having an interaction or an experience with insurance for the very first time. And back to the point around confidence and trust, I think if the first experience of insurance is a particularly bad one, then you have lost probably a generation or two of people who have trust insurance. So that is the big challenge. I heard some comments earlier around, well, maybe you try and address that by having bundled products that combine it with some cover that is underwritten, but wasn't entirely sure how that's done whilst recognizing the sort of underlying problem of not having the loss adjusters or the loss assessors to be able to go out and do those individual claims assessments or underwriting. So maybe there's more information on that. And then the last point I wanted to make again was a little bit in response to Tours, because he picked up on this point around customer value and fair outcomes for policyholders, where there is let's call it an outsourced relationship with the use of aggregators. And I don't think that's an agricultural index insurance specific problem. I think it's a problem wherever you have this kind of outsourced aggregator relationship, like we have a lot of that in the funeral insurance space in South Africa. But I do think it comes down to a question of accountability, of responsibility for the outcomes. And I can say the line that we have taken in South Africa, for good or bad, is that the responsibility fair and squarely lies with the insurer, with the insurance company. So if they are using aggregators as part of their distribution mechanism, which might make very good sense from an efficiency perspective, that's fine as long as they retain full responsibility and accountability still for the fair treatment of their customers, because the relationship is still between the insurer or the contract, if you like, is still between the insurer and the ultimate policyholder. So I think it does come down to issues of governance, oversight, and being comfortable that the insurer has the proper controls in place.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. So just to repeat one of the aspects, the important aspects you raised, is what I call, let's say, background research. In German, there's a word Grundlagenforschung. I don't know how to translate that. That's all the very nerdy stuff that the theoretical physicians do, which in 100 years will translate into space travel or something like that. And I realize now, yes, that there's a lot of, if you want to get it right, you have to start with some time in advance, which is a challenge because most, let's face the fact, most index insurance we know is project driven. So you've got donors, be at the Global Index Insurance Facility or USAID or World Food Program and so on. But all these donor programs, and that's something I like to emphasize wherever I'm meeting supervisors as well, they have a limited shelf life. Even if it says World Bank somewhere, it doesn't mean we have unlimited funds and unlimited time. And I have the impression sometimes, now I'm thinking of Central America, let's say, they think, well, if we don't get it off the ground this year, they'll come again next year. Well, what's the problem? Well, sooner or later. That's not how it works. The way the financing of index insurance, as I've come to know it, has a limited shelf life. So this thorough research has been a luxury that we haven't always been able to engage in. But I wonder, by the way, how many students currently are doing their PhD or their master thesis on all these many questions. How does weather indices correlate with maize or coffee or this or that? So there's a lot of questions that I believe would interest the academia of every country, or the Cotton Institute, or the Maize Institute, or the Rice Institute that they have in different countries. Have we mobilized that well enough? And another thought is in respect of consumer understanding or awareness. Something I've been dreaming about for a long time is to launch the index insurance game, the as-if game. Is there something we can do? Defining some parameters, some indices, and then just offer it on social platforms, or what's it called, social networks, so that people who get wind of it and find it interesting say, okay, let's pretend I buy this index insurance, and then let's see what happens. I see that there's been a drought here, I see there's been a good year. Does it correlate with what I see here? So before you actually start selling this thing, and I know some projects include that, they call it dry run or something similar, which is awfully good, I think. Often it's done because they didn't get all their act together in time, so they have to do a dry run. till the next planting season. But this is something that I wish we could see scale up continent-wide. It will have to be on mobile technologies, smartphones or cell phones or something, but that I believe is something that will or might help understand. Because let me also share that one problem with insurance is you cannot practice it very well. Eventually I learned that insurance is not so similar to microfinance as to mobile banking perhaps, because it's a very abstract thing, sounds like an excellent idea, but hell, do I know what I'm doing here? How risky is that? The difference in mobile banking is we can get together in one room. I send you a couple of shillings, you send him a couple of shillings, he sends me a couple of shillings. I put some shillings in my mobile wallet, and after an hour, we're confident enough that we understood it, and then we can send 200,000 shillings to our mother back in the country. We can't do that with insurance so far. The closest I've seen is this mobile automatic insurance, whereby you don't really risk making a wrong decision and being the laughing stock of your village. And that allows you this market discovery, as they call it. Can we find smarter ways for market discovery of index insurance? I think we can, but I haven't seen it yet. Now, this is also a very good segue to the next level of question dimension we want to add here. That's country experiences. You shared the South African experience. Oh, let me also add to address one of your things, one of the points you raised, something I've learned in Zambia. There's an insurance company or two in Zambia who combine the index trigger with actual on-the-ground loss assessment. So if the people in the village think that index has treated them unfairly, they can complain to the insurance company, and the insurance company says, okay, we're going to send somebody to assess. It's going to cost you $50. It's not free, because otherwise we're back at the conventional insurance thing. But if you're willing to pay that, and if you feel justified, then we're going to send somebody there. So that's a promising, nice way of combining these two things. Maybe drones or some other advanced technology, blockchain-based crowdsourcing will help make that more common. That as an example of other country case studies or country examples that I can contribute here. But I'd love to see more people coming up here and either discussing what we've been discussing so far or adding country-specific dimensions. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mia and Agrotosh. Glad to see you here. Shall we say ladies first, or is there any good reason you have to push?
Okay, that's simple enough, thanks. I want to talk about client value and sustainability, specifically at the hand of Madagascar, where I've recently been. They have about 11 million adults, and they have about 4.5 million adults that in the past year have suffered an agricultural shock, so either flood or drought. And it raises the question of value. Is agricultural index insurance really the product that's going to help these farmers manage their agricultural risks? Or are there actually other products that we need to think about? So when we're talking about value, we're not just talking about the lack of abuse. We're also talking about actually delivering value compared to alternatives, such as savings, such as remittances, etc. So I think we definitely need to think about agricultural index insurance in a broader spectrum of options that you've got to manage agricultural risk. And I think that begs the question that we need to have a bigger debate about who actually the target beneficiaries could be of agricultural index insurance. Are we really talking about the poorest of the poor farmers? And I'm not saying that middle income farmers or slightly bigger farmers are not viable consumers or not consumers that actually need the product. I think that's definitely an important policy position to take, that you actually want to help your slightly bigger farmers as well. But I think it is important to think about who can we really viably reach with agricultural index insurance. And that also means maybe that it's not just the actual end farmer that we should be thinking about, but we should also be thinking about a broader spectrum of users and consumers in the agricultural ecosystem. Maybe the microfinance institution, that's critical to extend the credit, but if a flood hits and all their consumers default, they can manage to self-insure some of the risk, but they can't actually insure the bigger catastrophic risks. Maybe it's actually the gin or the cotton mill or one of those kind of institutions that are facing risks. And maybe they are more viable consumers of agricultural index insurance, especially if the farmers are really poor in their region. So I think we also need to think about a broader spectrum of beneficiaries for agriculture index insurance beyond just the individual farmer, that we can really deliver value to, as opposed to having kind of lofty policy ideals that are difficult to defend when we're thinking about the viability and the ultimate benefit. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Mia. I can't resist making some comments there. On the one hand, to confirm the importance of the value chain approach. So what we've seen is helpful when you propose to launch index insurance somewhere is actually value chain studies. Who keeps how much money of a bag of roasted cashew nuts from Tanzania, let's say, or Mozambique? And you'll find that it's the roasters, in this case of Mozambique cashew nuts, it's the roasters, the packagers, the exporters who get most, I don't know, 60% or so. So for the cashew nut farmer, they keep maybe 10%, and everything else goes to some collectors, farm gate buyers. So they get a lot more money, which means two things. They've got more purchasing power for the insurance, and they've got more risk at all. The farmers, let's also face the fact, most farmers don't just farm. And if they farm, they don't just farm cashew nuts. They diversify themselves. But all the other players in the cashew nut value chain, or coffee or whatever, they have something at stake. So helping them understand that and highlighting that, I think may result in something good. We're just starting to do that. We don't have so many successful examples yet. We don't have an awful lot of examples of successful micro index insurance, but they don't readily come to mind. The other thing is at the macro level as well. So talking to governments, and something I would just like to mention is governments do handouts to their farmers when something bad happens, and also to the city dwellers and to everybody in case of bad floods. But would that be a better way of doing that using insurance? Should governments consider the option to insure some of these risks? It would still be a policy for the Ministry of Agriculture, who would then get 5 million or 10 million or whatever to hand out to their herders or whoever. They would hand out money anyway. But the advantages, they could do that on a more transparent structure, so these farmers or herders would have a better idea when to expect something or not. Right now it's very different if it's election season coming up or not election season coming up, and if you happen to be the home province of the incumbent president or not. The second thing is, if they use insurance instead of budget line handouts, they could transfer the risk outside of the country. So this is a dialogue that at the World Bank we started engaging here and there, but I think also the insurance industry, supervisors, insurers, insurance associations, could use whatever opportunity they have with their public sector counterparts to bring back this idea. There's good reasons for insurance companies for governments to insure. National governments, subnational governments. And lastly, insurance companies are very good at getting the money quickly and transparently to these people. Budget line items are nice, and they don't have the disadvantage that the premium disappears at the end of the year, but it's not always awfully transparent. Who gets what when? So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Well, just to share briefly, I know we'll talk about it tomorrow as well. But in terms of some of the experiences we've had from Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania, and 3 or 4 other countries in Africa, I think for us, it's certainly in Southern Africa, I would say, although it's very important, basis risk is something which is extremely relevant for index insurance. But I wouldn't, we don't lose any sleep over basis risk because of the way the products have been working so far over the last 4 years. We haven't had any significant basis risk issue. What we do lose sleep over is various operational issues, which are extremely important. And I mean, sometimes I feel the conversation becomes a bit towards, weight towards the index and the accuracy of it and basis risk. But just to give you a quick example, I mean, we've had, we've been working a lot with some of the governments in different countries, including Zambia and also in Nigeria. And some of the products which have been developed at quite a large scale, a lot of resources put in, some of the marketing which was done in Zambia, where my colleagues personally went and had meetings with over 20,000 farmers These were like political rallies, some of them. It was part of a major social protection program of the government of Zambia. And then at the end of the day, the insurance didn't take off. Why? Because the underlying structures which insurance was supposed to be linked to, so in the case of Nigeria, it was a loan program. In the case of Zambia, it was an input subsidy. They did not happen, or they did not happen on time. So I think in Zambia, farmers are still getting subsidies now, although the rains have finished from last season. So the point I'm trying to make is some of these operational issues, just kind of dwarfs the more technical, relevant but technical issues of the type of index and the accuracy of it and measurement of the basis risk and so on. But then having said that, I mean, I think, at the same time, on the technical side, I think the good, sort of silver lining is that there is a lot of data that is now available. As Peter mentioned, we're living in the era of big data. So there's a lot of satellite-based data available. There's a lot of data from other sources available. But sometimes we also come across institutions which are essentially working in a very different way, where if you try to apply satellite data in that context, it doesn't really make sense. So just to give you an example, we were trying to obtain some weather data from an institution in Zambia, and then we couldn't because the floppy drive wasn't working. So I was like, okay, we'll come back when it is working. So similarly, I think also more seriously, I mean, one of the some of the missing pieces of data which is required for testing any good index is your loss history. So your damage ratios, your yield data. If you look at the quality of yield data, I would guess in most countries in Africa and Asia, it's abysmal. Sometimes you have the same yield being mentioned every year because essentially they're just copy pasting the value from the last year. So those are worrying. Those are things which I think on the data side, there's a lot which can be done in terms of improving the yield data, the loss history data. And also, I think as the point was mentioned earlier, I mean, the different public sector bodies also have to understand, the importance of how the data will be used in the insurance area. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Agrotosh. It's being pointed out to me that we're reaching the end of this session, and I hope you'll forgive me for cheating in one respect. The Fishbowl textbook requires me now to summarize this session, and I feel delighted. I've been doing this in consultative forums like this for a couple of times now, and this has been my favorite. And I see that you've enjoyed it as well. So I hope with that you'll forgive me for not summarizing very neatly. I thank you very much for your ongoing interest, enthusiasm, for the cooperation of everybody who's been here and who's been there, and I greatly enjoyed it. That's going to be my summary now.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to everybody who contributed to the discussion. It's good to hear that, well, it's quite a big task to hear all the questions that are still unanswered, but it's good to hear at least some solutions to some of